Hello and welcome to this week's show. I'm your host, Ian Juby, and this week I have the honor and privilege of producing this show on the banks of the controversial Paluxy River in a little town in East Texas called Glenrose. Now, the Paluxy River is famous for fossilized dinosaur tracks, but it's also famous for these controversial fossil human footprints, both beside and in the fossil dinosaur tracks. Dinosaurs and humans were not supposed to have existed contemporaneously according to evolution. According to the scriptures, they were both created together at the same time during the same week. They have always existed together, and the dinosaurs apparently became extinct sometime between the point of creation and now. Did dinosaurs and humans live together? Let's follow this week's excavation and see what we find.
This is a juvenile theropod track.
The Paluxy riverbed is loaded with incredible numbers of dinosaur tracks. So many, in fact, that Dinosaur Valley State Park was built just downstream from this site. At least one trail, named after Mike Turnage and Dr. Don Patton, has the longest trail in North America at 136 consecutive tracks.
It's unusual that you find juvenile theropod tracks with adult theropod tracks. It's a pretty rare find. It's not very often at dinosaur track sites that you see that. We have a number of examples on the Paluxy here in Glenrose of juvenile tracks in amongst the adult tracks.
But amongst these dinosaur tracks, other tracks have been reported. Tracks that, according to evolutionary theory, simply should not be there. Dinosaurs were supposed to be extinct at least 60 million years before humans ever evolved. These simple tracks have provoked highly emotional responses for decades. Many intelligent individuals have said very foolish things to try and explain them away. Some have made reasonable, perhaps even possible explanations for them. Many people's lives have been changed by them. One of those people was a Baptist pastor by the name of Baugh, who came to Glenrose to excavate dinosaur tracks as part of his archaeological training. His own discovery led him on a life-changing course.
One of the gentlemen I've also had the privilege of getting to know over the past, it's been over a decade now. Yes. Well over a decade now. And in factual fact, I told you this already, but you are the reason that I'm in creation science today, aside from the Lord Jesus Christ himself, yes. Of course.
Very gratifying to hear, Ian, because you're appreciated internationally. The work that you're doing is a great contribution to creation science and biblical creation as well. So it's very gratifying to know that to some degree had a little influence on your life, and that I appreciate.
All right. Well, you've had a profound influence, just for the record. Now, another thing I would like to hear your side of the story of something that had a profound impact on your life, and that was this very trail right here. Would you mind telling us that story?
We are standing at the spot, one layer below the platform on which we're having this interview, standing at the very spot that profoundly changed my life. I came down in 1982, president of a small college, and completing the master's in archaeology. My mentor, Dr. Clifford Wilson, said if you're going to refer to the Paluxy evidence, you need to do an original excavation. And he said just excavate one original dinosaur footprint and document the entire procedure. And so I said, well, one's not quite enough because I'm going to need at least 3 for gate and stride and triangulation. So he said, proceed. So I came down, raised the funds, got a volunteer group together. And I paid Mr. Emmett McFall $20 for the privilege of excavating for a week. The price has gone up considerably. Yes. This ledge extended all the way to the edge of the riverbank, some, I'd say, 40 feet away, 38, 40 feet away. And we removed by hand small sections of this layer. We took what it would give us. That is, there are fracture lines, and by hand we had crowbars, had strong individuals. They would pry that, and then we would pry those off to the bank to help in the erosion, and that was a wise procedure. We weren't just throwing them into the river. They didn't go all the way to the river, but that kept the cut bank from being eroded away more rapidly. Okay. So we pried them off there. Then delicately, as the crew behind me has now been trained to do, we went in with petiches, trowel, and brushes and excavated delicately. I had excavated at that point, in the course of 4.5 days, 19 dinosaur footprints. And that was much more than I ever anticipated. For sure. But able to not only get pace and stride, but to do some analysis on gait, on the lithification and the platform on which they were walking, which was limey mud at that point. And then I tried to stop the excavation.
Once you get addicted, you just can't stop.
Oh, I know, but Charles Hiddlebiddle came up and he said, now, we have the crew, they're responding very well, just let us remove one more slab of rock. And then if you want to stop, we'll stop. I said, okay. So I stood back, and it took them about 45 minutes to remove the slab of rock, push it down. And then we started excavating, and at the back of that section, at the very back of where that slab had been, there was to the right a dinosaur footprint that we had excavated. 17.5 inches away, there was a left human footprint, 16 inches long. And we continued to excavate. On a scale of 1 to 10, it was about an 8.5, which is a very high rating. Mm-hmm. The great toe, all the toes, the ball, all the definition, the arches were there in the heel. Wow. And so it blew my mind. So we continued the excavation. That was a left. We had a right, a left, and another right. Then I called the press for one interview. I told them what we had. They flew down by helicopter, put it on the news that night, and then I didn't sleep for 4 days and nights because that blew my entire paradigm.
I don't think I would have either.
At that point, I was a gap theorist. I was a creationist, but I placed a gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. So thus you can pitch the long geologic ages, you can pitch the dinosaurs and everything. This blew all of that because if you have man and dinosaur living contemporaneously, that destroys the gap theory, it destroys progressive creation, it destroys theistic evolution, it destroys atheistic evolution. And leading evolutionary scholars have admitted that. So the next morning I got on the plane, and as I was getting ready to get on the plane, I was handed a newspaper. Front page, the newspaper covered this. I flew back to St. Louis, and the day afterward, my secretary, I was trying to catch up on things. At my desk, my secretary pushed the button. She said, CBS is on the line. They want to do an interview. So I said, okay. So I was doing the interview with CBS. I'll never forget, my secretary stepped up to me as I was concentrating on that interview with the earpiece and everything, and she had a card which said, ABC is on the other line. Now, that was fun. I said to the guy on CBS, can you hold just a moment? ABC's on the other line. I need to let them know when I can get to them. Oh, yes, sir. Pushed the whole button, picked up the other line. I said, sir, CBS is on the other line. Can you hold a few moments until I finish that interview? Then I'll get with you. That was fun. And that evening...
You don't get to do that often.
No, that's right. That evening, they both carried the item on the national news. And from that moment until this, I've had no rest.
I guess not. Now, something you mentioned, which is very important, the viewers need to know, is the importance of the sequence. Now, you mentioned originally you came to excavate dinosaurs.
Correct.
And it was one of the stipulations when you're looking for identifying dinosaur tracks is the left, right, left sequence.
That's correct.
And of course, you attempt to do that for the human footprints as well, don't you?
Oh, very definitely. That's the reason I didn't just settle for one track, which was a near perfect track. It was pretty big, 16 inches long. But Shaquille O'Neal has a print, has a foot almost that long. And he's alive. He's a human being. He's quite a superior human being. So I knew archaeologically, because I had already studied triangulation, et cetera, and documentation. I knew that if I were excavating left, right sequence, you need at least 3, preferably 4, to get pace and stride. If I did that for the dinosaurs, certainly would do that for the human beings. That's the reason I didn't call the press immediately after discovering one human footprint. I needed at least 3, but I had 4, and when they flew down, we were able to verify.
Now, were those 4 the final 4? Did you like, how much of that sequence did you eventually excavate?
Oh, they continued, and over a period of the next couple of years, that was 1982. That was late April 1982. Over the next 2 years, we excavated 12 of those footprints. But we could not take them up, so they began to erode. Carbonic acid forms. Once you expose these tracks, dinosaur tracks as well as human tracks, once you expose those, the carbonic acid forms, and it really leaches. Now, as important as this interview is, my grandson just arrived.
Yes.
I think he has priority.
I think so too. Thank you for your time. We appreciate this.
As a result of this find, Dr. Baugh founded the Creation Evidence Museum, which he later built on the banks of the Paluxy River. Excavations are still held every summer and still changing the lives of skeptics and believers alike. David Lines came as a skeptic and has become one of the lead documentarians for the museum.
Now, have you been convinced by the Paluxy tracks?
Yeah, I went to the state park before I ever heard of this place, and because we had heard about other human prints down here. We looked at all sorts of erosion marks and thought, well, that kind of fits my foot. That could be one,
right? And
that sort of thing. And then we didn't see one until we came down. The very first one we came down with Don Patton, and on a Taylor Trail, and so we were scooping sand and pumping water and that sort of thing. And I was wondering, well, he's going to have to point it out to me. And then when it became evident, it just jumps out at you. I mean, when it's uncovered, you know. I mean, the features are all there.
Right. Including the right, left sequence.
Exactly. And the +6 track was the first one that came to light in that particular year that we were sandbagging.
Excavations are only held in the morning to avoid the extreme Texas heat. Dr. Baugh first explains the excavation technique, which he has developed over 2.5 decades.
Here's the technique. You use a patiche very carefully, and there will not be a lot of talking because you'll be listening for the sound. You hear that sound? That's solid rock. That's not. So you work, and then you listen for the sound. You work just a tiny teaspoonful at a time. You don't gouge in there. Our first objective is to get a straight line across here, and I'll be watching over your shoulder.
The technique is precise and followed strictly to avoid damage to any tracks. The limestone is first broken up and removed, exposing the clay marl on top of the next layer. That layer is then carefully removed bit by bit, looking for the telltale depressions in the rock below. When a track is found, it is immediately evident. Cleaning out a track is a time-consuming and careful process.
One of the gentlemen I've had the absolute pleasure to get to know over the past couple of years has been Professor M.E. Clark. Now, Dr. Clark, you've been coming here for egads. How many years? How many excavations have you come for?
I don't know the excavations, but I started about 1983, and been coming pretty near every year since. Missed a few.
And you used to be the jackhammer operator.
Well, crowbar mostly.
Crowbar. Okay, yes, I got to do the jackhammer this morning. So
Well, we had to use the jackhammer, but that's hard work.
that is tough limestone. It took us like an hour and a half this morning to remove that silly ledge. Yeah. Now, you were here. Were you not here when they uncovered the what is called the Becky track?
I missed that dig. I was there the summer before. We had a nice track before that one, and that was the trail into the Becky track.
Oh, I see. Do you recall which track that was? What it's called?
Oh, well, Becky Trail, I guess. Is that what you mean?
Part of the Becky Trail, right? Okay. Yes. Now, the one you had seen excavated the year before, was there much detail on that one?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. Okay.
No. About the right length. And there was some depth to it, but not a lot of toes and stuff.
Right. Now, have you been here when they excavated any that had some decent detail?
Well, way back in the 80s, Carl Baugh and I were here, I think it was one January, all by ourselves. And that was up river farther, and we uncovered a nice track there, maybe 6 or 7 toes. And the distinctive part of that was that Carl was down, he was doing the excavating, I was doing the watching and stuff. And he got down to the toothpick stage, and he was trying to take the debris out of the big toe, and it wouldn't come. And finally we decided that it was a kind of a cap on the toe, where the person stepping lifted up the stuff and it fell back into the toe.
Right. Now, when he says 6 or 7, he means on a scale of 1 to 10, not 6 or 7 toes. It was on a scale of 1 to 10. It was about a 6 or 7, and it had toes. That was why it was a scale of 6 or 7. Now that became known. I believe it was Dr. Baugh that named that as the Clark phenomena. Was it not?
Clark print, and they also found others in that trail, so it was the Clark Trail.
It was the Clark Trail. How many tracks were in that trail total? Do you recall?
I don't know.
And what year was that?
Must have been 4 or 5.
And what year was that?
I think probably the late 80s, no, middle 80s. Somewhere in there.
So that's pushing 20 years ago already.
Oh, yeah.
The skeptics have made some very irrational claims, but have also made some plausible claims. One claim is that the tracks are simply carvings. Now, this convenient explanation simply does not apply to the vast majority of the human tracks because they have been excavated underneath 8 to 12 inches of undisturbed limestone, in the presence of multiple witnesses.
So another gentleman that was helping me slug, actually, you were doing most of the slugging. I was just sort of standing around watching a lot here this morning, but we got here bright and early this morning. We've been pounding a lot of limestone. That actually seems to be something you've done a lot of here, right?
Yeah, we've been doing it probably since, I guess, 97.
So you've been coming since 97?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, of course, one of the contentions of some of the skeptics is that these are just carvings. Now, we always talk about, well, it's pretty hard to carve a track under 12 inches of undisturbed limestone. I don't know. What do you think?
I would have to agree with you. It took us a while just to get that small chunk out this morning, and I just can't see anybody sliding up underneath that and carving anything. So,
and you've removed most of that limestone for these excavations, haven't you?
I participated in several of the removal processes. Yes, that's right. Okay. And I can vouch definitely that there's a lot of limestone here that we've moved, and I don't see anybody getting up underneath it. It doesn't come off in little pieces. You got to break it into smaller chunks.
Right.
So,
have you seen any decent tracks ever excavated during your times here?
Yes, I've seen. And participated in the excavation of the Sauropod tracks. That they some of the earlier ones, the latest I was not there for, and then several Acrocanthosaurus tracks, and then even a couple of human tracks that have been excavated while I've been here. So.
Okay. Now the human ones. Did any of the human ones you were here for the excavation of? Did they have any details or anything, or were they pretty much just human-like?
They were pretty distinct. The one particular track that they uncovered while I was here, I believe it's called the Beverly Track, and that is the one where this, I think it's right, I don't know which print it is, but it's inside the dinosaur track itself, and it's rather distinct, and several people have tried their foot into it, and it fits quite well. And then there's the mud up pushing between the large toe and the second toe as well around the outside of it. So.
Okay, so you were here for the excavation of that one.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Now, are you convinced it's a human track?
Yes, I'm convinced. I'm convinced it's a human track. Of course, I have not any preconceived ideas that it wouldn't be a human track. So I'm willing to observe the truth as it lays and accept it as I see it. So, and in approaching it that way, I believe it's a human track.
Okay. Now, if you were to see that track, say, on the sand on a beach, would you conclude it was a human track there?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that seems to go without saying that you'll see one of those on the beach, and whether even not the distinction of it, a human laid it there, and so. Yeah, I would definitely agree that would be a human track. So.
All right. Okay, well, thank you for your time.
The fact that we have fossilized tracks of any kind presents scientific problems for both young Earth creationists, who believe these tracks were made during the flood, but also the old Earth theorists, who believe these layers were laid down slowly over thousands or perhaps millions of years. Several difficulties arise in assuming these layers were laid down slowly over the eons of time. In order to preserve these fossil tracks, the mud would have to be laid down thick and rapidly, then harden quickly, much like concrete. If the layers are even thousands of years old, then soil layers should have collected. There are no soil layers. Instead, what we find in the limestone and the clay marls is fossil worms, driftwood, seashells, and countless fossilized clams that were buried alive in turmoil. In 2004, I personally examined hundreds of these fossil clams and was unable to find even one buried in the living position. They've all been tumbled around and buried alive, some with their foot still sticking out between the shells. Clearly, they were all buried suddenly in a flood that laid down mud, which dinosaurs then walked in, which then hardened. But how on earth did dinosaurs walk around on the freshly laid mud, layer upon layer, in the middle of a catastrophic worldwide flood, as some creationists would propose? While on the banks of the Paluxy, the excavation team was given an unexpected treat. We were given a personal lecture on this subject by Professor Clark.
Sir Isaac was a very much of a biblicist and a creationist, I believe. He believed in the Bible. And he wrote more on the Bible than he did on scientific matters, and he wrote a lot on that. But he developed a law from his observations. Getting hit on the head with an apple was part of it, but it went farther than that. And he said that every body in the universe is attracted to every other body in the universe by a force that's proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. So each one of you is attracted to me, and I'm attracted to you. Now, I don't see any young lovers here. That's not the kind of attraction I'm talking about. But this is a physical force. But since we're not very big bodies, we don't develop very much force between us. So we have to find a bigger pair of bodies. The pair that I'm thinking about is the big one that goes overhead every night, the moon, and this one we stand on, the earth. Now there you have some big bodies. It's a product of their mass. And so we have a big force developed here. Now how is that force exhibited to us? Well, actually, when the moon passes over, the earth reacts to it. There are called earth tides. The atmosphere is affected by the moon. We have atmospheric tides. But neither of those, the earth certainly isn't very obvious. The atmosphere, we don't notice that very much, but we do notice the water tides. And they are, this force grabs a hold of the water, which is easily moved, and it pulls it up towards itself. The moon develops a bulge underneath the moon. Now, if you're standing on the moon and looking down on the earth at the time of Noah, when the earth was completely flooded, you wouldn't see the earth, you'd see the water. And I don't think from the moon you could see that there was a bulge underneath you, but if you came down and investigated, you'd find that there was an increase in the depth of the water underneath the moon. And that's not very exciting when you think about observations from the moon, because the water just stands underneath the moon. We call it a standing wave. But if you come down and stand on the Earth and have this tide in this global ocean passing over you, you're going to experience a deepness of the ocean at the time that the moon you're right underneath the moon and you're in this bulge. As you move a quarter of the way around the Earth, you're going to feel a lesser depth of the ocean. As you go around 180 degrees from underneath the moon, you're going to feel another bulge. Now, what's causing that bulge? Well, that's a little more difficult to explain, because actually the Earth and the moon form a system all by themselves. They're moving around the sun, of course, but they move around each other according about an axis that's located in the Earth. And so there's a centrifugal effect, and the water on the other side has tended to move out, being thrust out by that rotation. And so we form a second, nearly identical bulge on the other side of the Earth. So we have what we call semi-diurnal tidal waves.
Dr. Clark and H.D. Voss, while performing computer modeling on a global flood, discovered that a worldwide flood will build a tidal resonance in the water as a result of the moon. We see this very action today in the Bay of Fundy in eastern Canada. The gravity from the moon and sun attract the ocean waters into a bulge, a wave. Because of the shape and direction of the bay, a resonance is built up, essentially a tidal wave. The tides go up and down by as much as 45 feet or 12 meters twice a day. When we look to what the scriptures say about the global flood, we note that the flood didn't cover the earth overnight, but rather it took at least 40 days to cover the earth. That's almost a month and a half. So from this, we can build a model. During this time, as the water increases upon the earth, the tides would come up on the land, then recede, twice a day. Each time it came up on the land, it would come up higher as the floodwaters were increasing. As the wave came on shore, it would wash in a layer of clays and other debris, which now make up the clay layer. As the water sat there and then receded off the land, it left behind a layer of limey mud. Dinosaurs would come by, probably foraging for food during low tide. Apparently humans walked through this area as well. The lime hardened, and the next tidal wave comes in to form the next layers. Are these really human tracks among dinosaurs? We will explore these and many other questions in the next episode of Genesis Week.